r/Spider-Man PS4. Once a very peaceful place that, I don't even know what to call anymore. It went from like a nice place to talk about the 2018 game to people complaining about the sequel to people complaining about the people complaining about the sequel to people complaining about the people complaining about the sequel. Like, no, I'm allowed to have an opinion. And it was like, all right, this is getting kind of tiring. And then I remember a post where somebody was like, oh, do you guys feel bad for Insomniac for all the leaks? Like, personal information was leaked. That's pretty messed up. And everyone in the comments was like, no, they made a terrible game. They should die next. And I was like, okay, I think it's time to get off this crazy train. And from what I've heard since, it's basically like just a really bad version of the Arkham subreddit now, so that's fun. What I do know for a fact, though, is that it is full of very fiery opinions about this series, specifically the second game, so I thought it might be fun. I just talked about the entire series on my main channel, so I thought it would be cool to look at some of the hot takes here, see what I agree with, what I don't agree with. I'm just going to be looking through like the top posts of the last month, but I actually think that we should start with the post that I mentioned earlier about the leaks. So the actual post is about, does anyone else feel bad for Insomniac at this point? Yeah, Spider-Man 2 was rushed and the story wasn't as good as the first game, but still good, but they have one of the most entitled and spoiled fan bases out there. Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. They went through a massive hack which leaked employees' personal information, future releases, and Wolverine footage / gameplay that obviously wasn't done. Then they accidentally leave a dev menu in the game after an update which revealed they were working on a DLC. Now people think they're owed an explanation. Like, yeah, they could end all the talk if they just came out and said no DLC, but they're not required to say anything. I think this is a pretty reasonable take. Everything that we knew about the DLC, which they did end up confirming wasn't happening, this post is from a few months ago, everything that we knew about it was completely unconfirmed. It was from these leaks. Something else that we know from the leaks is that this game's budget was really, really high, to the point that even though it did insanely well, the profit margin wasn't that crazy. So it's not like completely ridiculous to assume that maybe they were gonna work on DLC, but then they decided not to, and they just wanted to focus on other things, especially after this leak came out. But they also maybe didn't know at what point this DLC was dead, if they were ever working on it in the first place. Like, we don't know any of those details. So a lot of people who are saying like, oh, they could have just said this a long time ago, they might not have even known if they were doing DLC at that point. Some of it might have already been done and it was turning into an expansion. Like, Miles Morales was not initially planned as a full expansion game, it became that later on. It's entirely ridiculous to treat the leaks as if they were things that were supposed to be public information, because this kind of stuff happens behind the scenes all the time and we just don't know about it. Now, with all that in mind, the top comment on here is, I paid over 200 euros for the deluxe edition of Spider-Man 2 to support the studio which made Spider-Man 1, a game which literally changed my life. I played 10 times and bought 3 times. I got an unbridled meh in return, and a studio that is not communicating with their customers. With all due respect for their work and compassion for their situation, especially for their employees after the hack, 1, I don't feel bad for them as a corporation if they used up to a $300 million budget for a game whose story and overall feel, strictly in my opinion, do not hold a candle to the first one, and 2, don't seem to think it's important enough to communicate with their potential future paying customers to have a couple of moderately compensated community managers let the fan base know what's going on. Those sentences are really weirdly put together, but I understand the point that they're trying to make here. So let me get this straight. They put together a game with no malicious intent. They never went out with the intention of like, we're gonna make Spider-Man bad now. Like, they didn't do anything to hurt you. You loved the first game they made, they put out a sequel, and you didn't like it. And to be clear, you didn't hate it either. You called it meh, an unbridled meh, specifically. And I just don't understand why the second game being bad has anything to do with the leaks, unless you're trying to make the case that they very intentionally tried to make it bad just to spite the people who liked the first one, which is like the most asinine take you could possibly make. That has nothing to do with it. Like, you can say that there are problems with the second game. I think there are problems with the second game. The video on my main channel talks about some of the problems with the second game, but I don't understand how that becomes like a personal affront against the developer. Like, you can be a little bit more cautious about what they make in the future. You should always be cautious about what anybody makes at any point, but to act like they're like personally committing some kind of act of evil against you because Spider-Man 1 is like way better than Spider-Man 2 in your opinion is very strange. Also, this whole attitude that this comment and then a lot of other posts on Spider-Man PS4 that I've noticed over the last year have basically that Insomniac is not communicating properly, they're not like giving us as many updates as we need. They've put out 3 Spider-Man games in the span of 5 years, and also there was a console jump in the middle of those, which means that you have to adjust to working on new hardware. They are by far the most consistent Sony studio in terms of just output, just sheer amount of things that they're putting out there, especially with this series. The total time between the announcement of this game and the release of this game was 2 years, which is not that long for modern release cycles. What the original poster said about like this being an entitled and spoiled fan base, this is the reason why I agree with it. Like, there's so much content here, and the fact is, a lot of people complain about the fact that this game was rushed, which, like, you only get when you're producing things really fast and trying to put out a lot of content. So, like, in one way, you're mad that they're putting out the content as fast as they are, but also they're not putting out enough content for you, and you're asking where's the DLC, even though they never actually outright said that they were going to do DLC. And like, I do think that there's some level of communication gap between the consumers and Insomniac's community managers, but also there might be certain things that are Sony mandated that they're just like, you cannot announce these things at XYZ time. Like, they had a lot of these gameplay and announcement reveals at their events, so potentially you can't talk about it before then. And I'm sorry that I'm sticking with this one for so long, but not to mention, you know, they've been changing their release strategy recently. They've had like a whole shakeup of like, we're going to be announcing things a little bit later into their life cycle from now on, and that was happening as this game was being marketed. And I just don't understand this idea of like treating Insomniac like it's some monolithic entity that's specifically trying to keep things from you or make their games bad is so much more complicated than you're making it out to be. And the fact that these leaks, and especially the personal employee leaks, are like a hand-wavy thing in this reply is such a weird vibe. Somebody responded, Jesus Christ, what kind of communication do you require? It's not a live service game with promised content updates. Full-price single-player game that had a defined beginning and end. They sold you a product and you completed it, now move on. They'll announce something when they have something to announce. I don't know, man. Have you ever seen how CDPR and Larian have been communicating with their players? They're very open about their games and constantly heed feedback. These are single-player games too, and I think Insomniac should clear a lot of the problems simply by being more open on social media. That's true. CD Projekt Red famously has never lied to their fan base and has never kept things from them and has never been a little underhanded with the way that they release information. No, I don't feel bad for them, actually. We're the ones that paid $70 for a game with high hopes just to be let down. They have no communication. The fact that after releasing the game, it took them 5 more months for those huge New Game Plus features, which are not very big at all. Based off the development problems, you're telling that they couldn't utilize that $300 million budget better and did absolutely no wrong at all. Why does the company have to be perfect and make the perfect product for you to care about the people that are employed there? That's so weird. I've spent way too long on this one. This one's titled, Actually It Makes the Game More Grounded, with the actually emoji. And it's a Twitter screenshot of the new Spider-Man game got me playing as a deaf girl spray painting poems about racism. Ninja, I just want to play as Venom and fucking eat people. First of all, to do exactly what the title was saying, and actually this post, there's no poems about racism. Like, that's not a part of the game. But other than that, I said this in my main video, I don't think that every single part of a Spider-Man game has to be action all the time. I think it's important to talk about the, like, smaller things in a Spider-Man game. That's what the comics are about. That's what parts of the movies have been about. If you're always expecting to do something like super high-flying action-y as Spider-Man, there's a bit of a misunderstanding of who the character of Spider-Man is there. But also on Insomniac's side, you have to play to the strengths of your medium. Like, sometimes they do make very boring missions within this framework. The Haley Graffiti mission does feel like an interesting idea that they didn't execute the best on. I think it works better in concept than in practice, and that's obviously what matters the most, so it's totally fair to complain about that mission to a degree and just say, oh, it was kind of boring. It's also like 10 minutes long and completely optional though, so like, I don't understand why people have to be this upset about it. It's one of the most brought up criticisms about this game, and like, honestly, I could not care. It's such an easy thing to ignore, and even if I think they could have done a better job with this or just left it on the cutting room floor, I don't understand why it personally offends you like that, especially because it's optional. Quote unquote more grounded, meanwhile carrying a spray paint can that changes colors by shaking it and you can hear it despite being deaf. Who cares, dude? Oh my god. First of all, where did this idea come from that this mission was specifically made to make the game more grounded? You realize that this game has like a dude turn into a giant monster who then sprouts his own wings, right? And if anybody does say that this is to make it more grounded, they're talking about the characters and like the interactions. They're not talking about the actual thing that you're doing. If anything, if they kept the same mission and they had the spray paint can, like you have to change it out one for another, that would just make it longer, which would make you more upset. Again, I don't understand why people really love pointing out this mission. It's 10 minutes long. What it does for people who are deaf, who do play these games, by the way, like there's a reason why all these accessibility features are starting to pop up. For what this does for them, it's like infinitely more important than what it takes away from me, which is ultimately nothing. Alright, hear me out. Best story, best map, best gameplay, wow. the stone's on you. What a hot take. I don't understand, like, best map, I guess just because it's snowing. But like it makes the city look cool, but it's the same map as Spider-Man PS4. Also, I noticed on my replay that like everything happens either in that like upper area, like just Harlem, or really low down in Manhattan. So I feel like they don't really use that space very well. It makes sense. There's like less content here, and it's supposed to focus on Harlem. So like, I just think that they like snow, which I mean, sure, fair enough. I'd say Miles Morales has the best side con in terms of how it impacts the main story. Like the ending actually feels better if you did all the side content first. This is very true. If you don't play all the side quests in Miles Morales before you finish the main story, it actually makes the ending like slightly worse. So playing it all before then is actually good. I'm wondering if the reason why they didn't do this for Spider-Man 2 is because they don't want you to feel like you're missing out on things if you hadn't done the side quests first, because some people save the side quests for later, which I kind of get, because then there's no way to feel like you're playing it wrong, I guess. If a certain way of playing it is a little bit better than another, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You don't always have to make sure that everyone is on the same playing field. Miles Morales is the best friendly neighborhood game. Yeah, absolutely agree. If you've seen my video, I basically say the same thing. I think Spider-Man 2 has the better map, but Miles Morales easily had the better OST. True, I'm still bumping the Aaron Davis original to this day. Spider-Man 2 map extension added basically nothing to the game. The snowy and Christmas vibes in Miles Morales were amazing. What? Wait, so when they added full other boroughs to the map, that adds nothing, but adding snow to the game it changed it enough for you. Like, I don't even fully disagree with the fact that like adding Queens and Brooklyn doesn't add that much to the map, but for you to say that the Miles Morales snow adds like a whole other layer to it, whereas Spider-Man 2's map extension adds literally nothing, is just straight up like, what a strange take. Anyone else find it weird how Peter is so dependent on everyone now? I have no idea why, but in Spider-Man 2 it feels like he needs everyone now. For instance, in the Sandman boss fight, he was constantly getting knocked down and needed Miles to save him twice, I believe. Okay, but also, Miles almost gets fucking eaten by the Sandman. I had kind of a similar experience when I first played through this game, where I did feel like Peter was kind of getting punked on a little bit. So I'm not going to completely hate on this take, but I do feel like some of that is just like protectiveness over this character. And when I started looking more objectively at it, there are definitely times where like Peter has to save other people. Again, I said this in my main video, but I feel like the issue isn't that Peter is being disserviced by the writing of this game, but more so the rest of the characters don't get treated the same as Peter, and they should also have moments where they need people to kind of come to their rescue. And it does happen a little bit less, to the point that it kind of does feel like it's singling Peter out, but I think it's actually a problem with writing the rest of the characters more so than it is a problem with writing Peter. It's the outcome of trying to write everyone around Peter, even basic-ass normal people like MJ, as his equals and someone he can always rely and depend on. This kind of thing leads to lazy and stupid writing of MJ and Miles being an important part in carrying out anything Peter needs or has to do. Not he can rely on them, but he has to rely on them. I don't completely disagree with this. I do think that the writing is the weakest part of the second game. I think some of their methods for making MJ feel like an equal part of the team do get kind of crossed up a little bit, because I feel like there are ways to take a non-superpowered character and make them very important to a superhero's life. This happens all the time in comic books, for example. I think one of the best parts about that, though, is that there is a person who is vulnerable and not superpowered, who is still putting their life on the line in some way or another. And that's something that can feel very personal to us in a different way, where we're like, oh, anybody can be a hero. It doesn't always have to be, you know, going and punching the bad guys. But I feel like MJ, the way that they've treated her and like instilled her into the gameplay, has basically turned her into a super powerful person in this universe who feels like she has like a lot of plot armor and is just like kind of going through and one-tapping everybody. And I do think they could do a bit of a better job there. Again, I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people are claiming in the comments here. MJ doesn't like ruin the game for me. I still like her character overall. I liked her character a lot more in the first one, but like, you know, whatever. It's all been downhill since they pointlessly changed Peter's face. I honestly don't care about the face change that much. I don't think they needed to do it. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people say, but it is weird that it changes like so often and they feel like they can't make up their mind on it. I will say one thing that's weird is that they said that they changed it because it matches the face model Ben Jordan a little bit better, and so they can be more emotive with that face. But if you look at the side-by-side of a lot of the scenes in the first game, he's less emotive with the new face. So I don't know, I just always found that kind of weird. Don't you think they missed an opportunity to recreate this scene? And it's the image of Spider-Man coming out of the grave in the Venom suit from Kraven's Last Hunt. 100%. I've said this since the game came out. Peter should have died when he was stabbed by Kraven, or in a way that makes more sense since the stabbing thing is kind of dumb. Then the game would have had a funeral for Peter Peter, making the player think he is really dead. Then the game forces you to play as Miles for a couple hours to really convince you Peter's dead. Then after some story missions, we get the famous scene of Peter crawling out of this grave wearing the slick new black suit. They also could have made it so that once Peter is risen from his grave, the city is in much worse state since Miles is struggling to handle Kraven, Martin Lee, and all the other criminals by himself, so Peter becomes frustrated and has to go clean up his city, which can fuel the symbiote's rage as Peter gets more and more mad at all the criminals destroying his city. Somebody should have let you in Insomniac's kitchen because this cooks. Hahaha, thanks dude, this is just what I think would fit as a Spider-Man fan. It's honestly not that hard to come up with good ideas, makes you wonder where the writers went wrong. Well, I think the first problem here is that it is hard to come up with good ideas, especially within this larger ecosystem of development that is not just based around writing. Like, there's a reason that some of the greatest directors or some of the greatest writers will have duds every once in a while, and why people who do this for a living can maybe even consistently be poor at it. It's not always necessarily that they're bad at their job, it's usually something a lot more complicated than that. Typically when I see a fan rewrite, I just don't put too much stock into it because the fun thing about a fan rewrite is that you don't have to deal with a lot of the restrictions that the people who are actually making the game had to deal with. For example, using this edit that they've made, how do you deal with side quests? Because some of these side quests are Peter specific, so do they just disappear by the time that he dies, so you think that you missed out on content? Did they go to Miles now and you have to rewrite two different versions of the quests, one for when Miles is doing it and one for when Peter is doing it? And I know that they had a lot of side quests in this game that both could do because it didn't really matter, but some of them it did matter who was specifically doing it, and a lot of those were the best missions in the game, so you have to sacrifice that in favor of writing a bunch of missions that are essentially Spider-Man agnostic. It doesn't matter which one's tackling it. Also, we have no idea what they're trying to do for a sequel, so maybe they do want to actually kill off Peter, and that becomes way less effective if they fake kill him off the game before. Also, people might be mad that they paid for a Spider-Man game with two Spider-Men on the cover, and one of them is just gone for a significant portion of it. In a universe where that's the story that they go with, we have no idea what people would be complaining about then. People might have a problem with how Miles-centric this supposed sequel to Spider-Man 1, a Peter Parker-focused game, is. I guarantee you that everybody who wrote for this game has read the Kraven's Last Hunt comment, and I guarantee that this was an idea that they floated at some point, that Peter should die and they should recreate the scene. And either for gameplay purposes or future games purposes or just the fact that they wanted to do something a little bit different, they decided not to do that. Anybody can write like a fan fiction or a rewrite to something, but you don't have to deal with the same kind of restrictions that the people making the game did. Could we agree that she was genuinely so annoying? Not gonna lie, Finn in the entire underground was so annoying, but I'll be honest, I really wanted to see Miles, Finn, like, yeah, he was holding back, but he did whoop her ass in the end, so yeah, she died. What? This is a really strange post. I do agree with the sentiment, though. I don't like Finn. I think she's my least favorite character in these games. Screwball was written to be annoying, so that when you finally caught her, it's satisfying. The writers wanted you to like Finn, despite the fact that she's a literal terrorist. I don't know about like Finn, necessarily, but yeah, they definitely underplay some of the stuff that she's doing to make you, like, kind of sympathize with her. Flag Smashers all over again. IMO, Finn in the Underground are the video game equivalents to Carly and the Flag Smashers from Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I agree with this. I put this as an edit in that other video. Like I said there, one of my least favorite tropes. So you know what? We can end things off here on an actual agreement. Definitely didn't disagree with like everything that was on here. There are some valid points, but I feel like everyone's taking it like well out of proportion. There are certain things that are like, yeah, that's like a flaw in the game, but I just don't think that it's worth like being this upset over. I feel like being in this environment makes you appreciate a lot of this stuff less, which is kind of why I stopped going on this subreddit in the first place. I didn't enjoy talking about Spider-Man. Not that I would actually comment on anything, but reading about all this stuff. I didn't enjoy like this super hostile environment for the character. I feel like for Spider-Man, it doesn't have to be that serious. It's not that deep. Anyways, if you had any thoughts on these hot takes, let me know. If you have your own hot takes, drop them in the comments. I fully expect some people to have different opinions on this stuff. It's kind of a contentious game at this point, but as long as you're civil, feel free to disagree with me. Honestly, I want to see other people's takes on this game in a less hostile environment. If you want to see my full thoughts on the Spider-Man series, or at least like the side content and the writing, which is the main stuff that I focus on in my long critique video, you can go check that out on my main channel. If you're new here, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.